Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So this episode I'm calling How the Left Has Been Fooled by Populism and Anti-Intellectualism. So this episode is kind of a continuation of the discussion in the last episode about the trucking convoy, and but what I'm trying to take a step back and look at more general trends on the left, even 150-year-old trends, but also more recently in the last 5-10 years, and especially in the last 2 years during the pandemic. So basically, the left, I think, is kind of a composition of populism and intellectualism of a certain type. But there's always some tension between those two things, at some times in history greater than other times. And when they left or had sort of a stronger, basically during the mid-20th century, when Marxism and social democracy were sort of, they inform each other to some degree, were kind of dominant. There was sort of kind of a hegemonic set of theories. People went to certain books and they read about them. They read Marx, they read Lenin, they maybe read Mao, so forth and so on. And they kind of got a common vocabulary, so forth and so on. This was sort of this counter-intellectual tradition that nevertheless thought of itself as scientific, that it was somehow on the same side of the Enlightenment as natural science, so forth and so on. They call themselves sciences, and some of them, it's controversial that they call themselves sciences, but anyway, there was an idea that this was quote unquote scientific socialism, among other things. So, but anyway, that sort of set of intellectual ideas, that foundation, whatever it was, has been questioned both by reality and by, it's flawed in a number of different ways. And, I'm a critic of that tradition in some ways, and I think it needs to be overhauled. But anyway, it still provided this idea that you were intellectual at the same time as you were with the people, that you were an ally of the working class, an ally of ordinary people, even as being an intellectual. And so now that was sometimes and often pretension and delusion for some people, because they were remote from working class people, and sometimes that was, in certain circumstances, it wasn't, and that the people were quote unquote organic intellectuals. In other words, people were emerged out of a particular struggle, and they learned things about the economy and politics and society, and that they became learned people in some way or another, and were also at the same time considered to be part of a collective, a cross-class collective, you could say, between a middle-class intellectual person or even a working-class intellectual person and the working people. And so anyway, that all this language is very is not part of the left of today. So the left of today in the United States has been focused on major strategy questions related to the Democratic Party, and also there's some in fragments, some movements, some like Occupy Wall Street. At one point, the Iraq War, the anti-Iraq War movement, which were sort of flashes in the pan, but then in a more sustained way in the last 6 years, around the question that basically inspired by Bernie Sanders, and to some degree led by Bernie Sanders, though, that that at least his example, and also inspired by his movement, and many of the connections that people made were through working on Sanders campaigns, and some of the organizations that have grown up around this electoral left are related to this particular question of how can we get the Democratic Party to become once again the party of a New Deal, and one that completes the promise of the New Deal, in some sense realizes the vision of the second Bill of Rights that FDR proposed in the 1940s, and updated obviously and expanded and made getting rid of the racist parts of or the racially discriminating parts of the New Deal, and how it was put together, and also and other elements of that. And so and of course there are also problems with that project, and and it's not necessarily the most radical project, and it may not be what we actually need to be doing, but it is certainly it seems to be a step along the road to where we need to go, at least according to me, and according to many other people. And so anyway, but it's not a left that comes from a theory, comes from a tradition of theory, of studying theory. And I'm not saying it should study the theories that people studied in the 1960s and 70s, and then spun off into various sects of leftists, and based on the theory, based on a guru, or a dead guru, or a living guru, who supposedly was a wise, usually man, almost always man. But anyway, and that tradition is no longer it's no longer what is happening. But still, I think we have more in a demographic sense, we still have a fracturing of the left, and between what I'm calling populism, and intellectualism, or between people who are focused on being of the people, or who come from the people, who are themselves the people being working class people who are either or not, didn't graduate college maybe, or maybe just maybe have a high school education, so forth and so on, have learned things on the job, have learned practical things and not necessarily academic things so much, but they still are maybe of the left in some way or another, or wanting progress and change, and they support the left. But anyway, without this, what happened, especially with the pandemic, so there's the Sanders movement, and then many supporters of Sanders were people who were college educated, not everybody, but the prospects of people, so the prospects of people who got college educations have diminished substantially, and there's the load of student debt, so forth and so on. So there's this massive failure of the meritocratic dream of what's promoted by mostly now the Democratic Party, that somehow acquiring an education or acquiring a degree, and then personal advancement, that you can individually advance, and that instead what the left is saying, no, we need to advance collectively. We need to, you can also try to advance individually, but that what's lacking in America is a collective advancement, a collective building of institutions, building of opportunities, or the generation of opportunities for a broad mass of people all at once, by, for instance, providing health care to them, by financing their health care so they don't need to worry about bankruptcy if they get sick, and they can detach their health care from their job, health insurance from their job, so they can freely choose employment based on their desires to work in a particular job, and so forth and so on. So anyway, with this movement of people who are sort of down, or either horizontally mobile or downwardly mobile, or mobile people who were educated, and also some working people, or people who basically were seeing their lot in life, the buying power of their wages, diminish or be stagnant, and also seeing that there is vast wealth in our society. That Sanders spoke to that, and he mobilized many people. At the same time, there's so many forces working against that kind of movement, and that kind of so it's very hard to organize it as we've been doing it. But then the pandemic has come, and the pandemic really has sort of in a very sharp and poignant manner found the weaknesses in the idea that this mixture of populism and intellectualism could be it's a happy marriage. So I mean, as I was saying, the left, is this combination of basically we are people who think of ourselves as of the Enlightenment, but also of the people. And then we have this pandemic that really requires us to rapidly learn new behaviors based on science, and based on even on the understanding of statistics and statistical probabilities, that are things that you learn often in certain aspects of college education, not all college education, but certain courses within some college education. And so anyway, so it basically requires that people study up, even if they don't have college degrees or whatever, that they study up and learn this new information and then act accordingly. And so it's become a very divisive issue. For instance, that doing public health behaviors often on an individualized way. So I've talked about on Politics 2100 that the anti-COVID-19 effort is a massive collective effort on a societal level. It's about recognizing our connectedness. But at the same time, there's an individual responsibility part that has become a badge in a way for some people, of probity, of individual, of virtue signaling, of moral, appeals to people's moral narcissism, that they can they can show off their superiority as that they're hyper caring people and hyper good people by being the most rigorous followers of public health measures like masking and vaccination, and talking about vaccination, and also remote learning if it's available, or remote working if it's available to you, and also that remote working is also people with some certain white collar positions are not people in healthcare, but people in office jobs of various kinds could do those things remotely in a way that that people who work manually or work in service jobs couldn't. So we had a schism. The pandemic could easily create in this very fragile group that essentially doesn't have really a centralized leadership. Bernie Sanders is not the leader of. He's not a charismatic leader. He's a beloved leader, but he's not really, and he's not. His ideology is. He doesn't really have he's not very theoretically minded. He doesn't sort of talk philosophically. He talks in human terms. He talks often in a relatable manner. Um, I, th- I think he's a little bit economistic in terms of his focus, in terms of economistic, in terms of just numerically economistic, in terms of like talking about billionaires and taxation and about bread and butter issues, which are they're key, and we need more politicians talking like that. But he also is not this sort of visionary. The vision he's presenting is basically of the existing societies, like in Canada and in Europe, where they have obviously also endangered social democracies. But anyway, but certainly the ideal, the vision, that they are still way in advance in terms of social welfare provisions than the United States. But anyway, that's the vision that he's presenting, is really that, which is fine, and which is more than 98% of U.S. politicians who don't even have that vision of a better society and don't present it to people. And it's really good that those societies really exist, and you could travel to them and basically experience, if you talk to people there, a society that is not quite as dog eat dog and where people are not living on the precipice of bankruptcy and unemployment, or employment is a little bit different, but it's certainly bankruptcy and ruin, and ill health and so forth and so on, because of economic issues and public policy issues. So, but anyway, so the pandemic has created this schism, which people like the convoy, people have driven in through, and now they're not of the left, but that they've created a schism between the centrists and the right wing. Though the right wing also has its own form of populism that it's trying to develop. It's been trying to develop it even before Donald Trump came on the scene. A sort of we're united against the government. To be populist on the right means to be against the government, and to always be criticizing the government and saying the government is the source of all problems, and that and you can find people who are ordinary people who have bad experiences with various bureaucrats, and not only that, it's true. I mean, you can, the police, are a part of the government, and there are people who are typically even, part of the constituency of the Democratic Party and the left, who also are critical of parts of the government and how it works constantly, and so forth and so on. But the whole notion of government per se as being the problem is the difference between the right and the left, and so, or the center right, the right and the center left and left, and the centrists and the left. So anyway, this anti-intellectualism we can see in, or let's say, the anti-vax movement and all of those, anti-COVID, COVID denial movements. A lot of it is about disbelieving the scientific knowledge and thinking that it's wrong. And we have people who are favorably inclined toward it in the center and the left, who say no, that's true. What these scientists are saying, and we have people on the right who are saying no, and that's part of this sort of anti-intellectual populism that is typical of the right. So I think because the United States is so anti-intellectualism has a long tradition in the United States, that it's hard for the left in the United States to embrace intellectualism beyond the idea of public intellectualism. So not just this idea of acquiring knowledge to get ahead individually and to ascend the ladder, but to be a public intellectual and to provide, to be part of a collective of people who are working on solutions, but also with some maybe original, maybe unique, maybe whatever insight coming from knowledge and understanding, ability to articulate things in words, so forth and so on, that you can consider "quote unquote" intellectual. That that is not valued in the United States so much, or it's looked down upon. It's something so anyway. So when this COVID-19 hits, we have a split between or a bigger split, and we have people then, like as I was mentioning in the last video about the Truck Convoy, that Richard Wolff, who's a Marxist professor, so kind of the archetype of an example of an old-style left intellectual, who nevertheless is erring toward "quote unquote" the populist position of being against vaccine mandates, against coming basically against the idea of a public health effort led by government bureaucrats, and that this is somehow a populist, somewhat anarchistic, you could say, working class position, or at least, or now there's a video from a few months ago where you have Wolff, in a conversation with Jimmy Dore is one of these operators on the left who, or formerly of the left, let's say, he's not on the left anymore, but he still has some credibility among certain people on the left. He basically, he's part of this movement, the anti-intellectual movement I'm talking about. But anyway, he's had Wolff on occasionally, and Wolff in one video was wearing this. Sounds like a minor detail, but Wolff was wearing one of these hats that was typical of what working class people used to wear in the 1930s and 20s and 30s, basically, sort of a bicycle cap, you call it, but made of tweed or something like that. So it's not really a bicycle cap. It's not like a racing with bicycle cap, but anyway, but sort of a tweed cap, brimmed cap. And so, and he was wearing, and so it was clear, it seemed to be, along with, it seemed like it's a pretension for him as a professor, a tenured professor at UMass Amherst, to be pretending that he's a working class person, actually, of about 100 years ago or 90 years ago. And it's interesting, and it's at the same time a little bit sad, and out of touch in a way, because at the same time he's against these vaccine mandates and so forth and so on. So more typical now of people, quote unquote, on the left, not necessarily Marxist left, but that people are supporting COVID, progressives in general tend to be supporting a cautious approach to the pandemic, and supporting public health measures that are more restrictive, trying to cushion the hospital system, trying to keep people from getting infected, trying to flatten the curve, so to speak. And that effort seems to go against the basically the idea that you try to be popular, and you try to appease people, and try to not only appease people, but you want to be of the people in a way, sort of be. This is a word from French, l'homme sensuel, or kind of the person of the senses. It's a little bit of a way to kind of looking down on working people in a way, or Hanswurst, which is a German word for the kind of this character that's supposed to be a person of their drives, of their appetites. So, and the right wing, in a way, these this portion of left culture is also used by the right wing, or it's not. I'm not saying Hans Voss is of the left necessarily, or l'homme sensuel is a left concept, but that the we're trying to split ourselves on the left as a left intellectual, so on and so on, between respecting science, being part of a scientific enlightenment project, at the same time trying to be, or wanting to be part of a popular movement, trying to foment a popular movement, trying to be an agent of that popular movement, trying to speak to people who are not necessarily so interested, in love with or interested in abstract ideas, like an intellectual is. And so it's this tension is being tried and tested because of the very rigorous demands of the pandemic and of maintaining public health in the pandemic, which is taxing on people, especially taxing on people without a full public health response that includes, among other things, and this is, I write in the modern monetary theory tradition about economics and politics, and without the monetarily sovereign government putting money in and prioritizing popular protection and public health, unfortunately, our government prioritizes military spending over social welfare spending, which would include public health spending. So within that context, it becomes harder to be part of the people and be with the people if the government is not supporting them and making it easy for them to comply with public health measures. And this goes doubly. So this is, if you're bored and tired with talking about COVID-19 and public health measures, let me just say that it's a test case, and other people have mentioned this, have said something similar to this, that it's a test case for what we need to do for decades to come, not just to combat future pandemics or whatever, but to deal with our climate crisis, the climate catastrophe that's breaking around us. To build a net zero energy society requires that we be as inclusive as possible and bring people in at the same time as embracing hard scientific realities that are uncomfortable, that challenge us, that make us that challenge our appetites, that puts us in conflict in some sense with some of our appetites, okay, and with some of our desires, and which is, in theory, easy, not necessarily in practice. In theory, it's easier for someone who's an intellectual to embrace those things in theory, not necessarily in practice, and at least to talk as if they do, and to promote them, okay? But in reality, we have to all, intellectual or semi-intellectual, whatever, we're just normal people. We have to all be creating a society that is quite different from our own, that requires us to do things differently and think about either support a government program that makes it almost spontaneous and effortless for us to have consumption patterns and work patterns and so forth and so on that lead us into a net zero emitting society, a society where basically zero fossil fuel emissions, basically, and very much reduced or zero emissions from our food system and agricultural system and so forth and so on. And so, and that requires lots of changes in how we act and how we eat and how we, it's not all easy. And so it requires us to have a way of thinking about it and a way of directing our actions, to change them, to adjust them, to figure out what's right for us and also right for the future society. So or a future, basically for society to have a future. Okay, is a better way to put it. So anyway, so that requires us to bring people in to the project, and then also to talk to people and to be part of this massive movement of thinking people using their minds, using knowledge they get from science and knowledge they get from each other, and to create a newer reality that is more sustainable for us as a species. So, getting back to this question, so the left has been tied up about this conflict, and it doesn't necessarily, even if you start from scratch and forget about the history of the left in the 20th century, we still are torn between these two impulses. And anyway, I think I need to I will bring this up in a subsequent video and talk about it some more, because there are many sub-issues to this question. But I hope this discussion is of help to you and is not too abstract. And I look forward to any comments you have and reactions you have in the comments section. And if you like the video, please like it. And also, if you are enjoying Politics 2100, please subscribe. And I will see you in the next video.